Welcome to Deerhound Productions. I'm DanCat33, and I'll be explaining the story of Bendy, Lone Wolf. This spin-off game follows Boris the Wolf around the events of the second game, Bendy and the Dark Revival. While this is mostly a fun spin-off game, it does have a lot of lore implications. So let's start off with Boris himself. In case you're somehow unfamiliar with this goofy guy, Boris was a main character in chapters 3 and 4 of Bendy and the Ink Machine, and a minor character in Dark Revival. Now he's the titular Lone Wolf. Just like in the original version of this game, Boris in the Dark Survival, you need to collect scraps around the studio to make a representation of Boris, which was previously seen in Bendy and the Ink Machine's version of the cycle. Just like in Dark Survival, when Boris completes his collage, he sees a glimpse of the man he used to be, albeit with new 3D visuals. However, unlike in Dark Survival, we see Boris's real name flash on screen letter by letter, spelling out Buddy. In the non-canon Bendy book, Dreams Come to Life, the main character Buddy ends up becoming Boris the Wolf. Because this was a non-canon book, some people believe that Boris wasn't Buddy in the games, and it was instead Wally Franks, the Joey Drew Studios janitor. But this directly confirms that Boris the Wolf is Buddy in the games too. However, the developers have said that the books are non-canon, and that Buddy in the games isn't the same Buddy from the books. In those, Buddy's a nickname for Daniel Lewick, but Mike from Joey Drew Studios made it seem like Buddy's an entirely different character in the games. I have mixed feelings on this. I appreciate the developers being so upfront about the canonicity of the books and their characters, but at the same time, losing all of Buddy's character would be a shame. Hopefully his game variant has some personality that we'll learn about in the future. Anyways, a brand new addition to the story is the ending to Boris's tale. In this game, he collects parts to a prototype ink machine and reconstructs it. We'll focus more on the machine later, but it summons a whole bunch of searchers, lost ones, and the Bendyland robots. After those foes are defeated, the machine is fully charged and opens a portal to the real world. The game ends with Boris stepping through the portal and escaping the cycle. So just like Bendy / the Ink Demon in the ending of Dark Revival, Boris has left the cycle and has entered the real world. So if it wasn't clear enough, it seems like Bendy 3 will follow the cycle leaking into our world. Bendy and Boris are both on the loose, so I'm sure more creatures will follow. Jumping back to the existence of a prototype ink machine, this device helps explain the origins of the machine and the cycle itself. In case you're unaware, the world in the Bendy games is a parallel universe known as the Cycle. Joey Drew created it using the ink machine, and he used it to torment a replica of his former business partner, Henry Stein. We learn from a book by the CEO of Gen, Alan Gray, that using a vessel of flow, known as a flux break, you can reveal and control alternate universes. I believe the ink machine is a flux break. It allowed Joey and Wilson to control the cycle and travel between worlds. It seems like this prototype machine was the first flux break created. In Bendy and the Ink Machine, it's established that the machine was developed to produce living cartoon creatures made of ink. But then in Dark Revival, we learn they can somehow make other worlds and transport people between them. It's kind of confusing as to why the machine would need to be able to create a whole other realities. But in Thomas Connor's audio log from Lone Wolf, it sounds like it was more of an unintended side effect, considering how he deems the prototype test a mystery and a failure, saying he tapped into something that he couldn't explain. So it seems like Thomas accidentally opened a portal, probably to a version of the cycle before Joey took it over. Memory Joey says that Joey Drew created the cycle, but it's implied in Lone Wolf and Alan Gray's book that this universe, or wire as Alan refers to it as, already existed. Joey just used the ink machine to control and mold this world. Speaking of Dark Revival, since it seems like multiple ink machines can exist at the same time and travel between worlds, I wonder why Jen had to steal back the ink machine from Archgate at the end of that game. Maybe only Thomas Connor knows how to develop a flux break, since the only two flux break machines were both developed by him. So it looks like unless Thomas makes a new machine, the only way in or out of the cycle are the ink machines, explaining why Jen stole it instead of just making a new one. Maybe in Bendy 3, someone could reconstruct the prototype machine within the cycle and use it to escape. Since both Bendy and Boris are in the real world now, the last member of the trio in the cycle is Alice Angel. So perhaps she'll find and use the prototype ink machine in Audrey's variant of the cycle and escape. This is all just spitballing, but after Lone Wolf, I'm even more excited for Bendy 3, and of course the various spin-off games in the works. Speaking of other games, in Lone Wolf, we learn a lot about the ink creatures from throughout the series. This is kind of the Help Wanted 2 of the Bendy series, where we bridge the gap between important story events. In this case, we get to see how Wilson managed to capture the cycle breakers that we see locked up during Dark Revival. Let's start off with good old Sam the Man Lawrence. If Boris collects candles and Sammy's mask, he gets a vision of the past, where he sees Sammy hiding from the ink demon in the music department. This is awesome if you're a longtime fan of the series. Returning to the music department and being put in the shoes of Sammy Lawrence is incredible. Anyways, he hides away from the world of madness in a sanctuary, and we get some interesting shades to his character, with his music not quite soothing his soul. His sequence ends with the great reveal of him being captured by a keeper. These creatures were created by Wilson when he took over the cycle, and they do all of his dirty work. As we see in Dark Revival, the keepers have locked up Sammy, and at long last, we learn how that happened. We also see how Alice Angel was captured. In Lone Wolf, she leaves messages for Boris, pretending to be a poor woman named Mila trapped in the cycle. Her audio logs lure Boris right to her, where she tries to kill him. However, he manages to escape, and during the chaos, a keeper captures Alice. However, as seen in Dark Revival, she doesn't stay locked up for very long. She escapes and hides out in Wilson's retreat, where she later kidnaps Audrey during Chapter 5. Someone who meets a much worse fate is the Projectionist, the ink monster version of the studio's projectionist, Norman Polk. Boris encounters him during his exploration, and this monster is treated with less mercy than Alice and Sammy. Instead of simply capturing him, the keepers attack and kill the Projectionist, decapitating him as a callback to his demise in Bendy and the Ink Machine cycle. Later in Dark Revival, we see that the keepers have his head on display. The last victim of the keepers is unfortunately Heidi. While all these other characters were monsters, as far as we know, Heidi is an innocent and playful soul. In Lone Wolf, she plays hide and seek with Porter, another lost one from Dark Revival who can teleport. Unfortunately, during the game of hide and seek, the keepers abduct Heidi. In Dark Revival, we never learn much about her, but the game's archives shed some light on her story. She was captured because of her ability to travel through the ink, allowing her to access places that she shouldn't have. Wilson and the Keepers likely saw this as a threat to their plans, so she was locked up in the pit, and the horrific experience there reverted her to a childlike state. Later in Dark Revival, Audrey encounters her outside of the pit, so it seems that just like Alice, she escaped. Some other major characters in this game are the Bendyland bots. The Bendy bot was first introduced in Bendy and the Ink Machine, albeit deactivated. From Bertram Piedmont's audio log in Lone Wolf, we learn that he added cameras in the Bendy, Boris, and Alice bots so that they could recognize basic shapes. However, if they recognize a shape, they won't ever let it go. Every 10 days, Boris enters the Bendyland warehouse and faces off against one of the animatronics. After being damaged enough, they'll run to a charging pod, which recharges their health, but leaves them open to attacks. I think it's pretty neat to have these guys show up. If you aren't aware, I'm a big fan of malfunctioning, homicidal animatronics. And it's really cool to see Bendyland again. I'm kind of bummed out that it wasn't an explorable zone, but it's a great boss battle arena. As I'm sure we're all asking, what's next after Lone Wolf? Well, I think for the most part, this game is less about what's next and more about filling in the gaps in the story with the Keepers and their prisoners. As I previously discussed, I do think that Boris escaping the cycle is continuing the takeaway from Dark Revival's ending, that the cycle is steadily leaking into the real world. And I'm sure that will lead into Bendy 3, where Boris will absolutely return. I've seen a lot of theories that Bendy 3 could focus on jumping between the cycle and the real world. However, I'm not sure how this will work, since it seems like the ink machines are the only devices that can travel between worlds. Regardless, I still think it could be very cool, story and gameplay wise, but we'll just have to wait and see. Overall, I'm very happy with Bendy Lone Wolf. It was a blast and a great improvement upon Boris and the Dark Survival. It's been a while since we got a new Bendy game, but I really think the series is in a good place right now. Bendy and the Ink Machine and Bendy and the Dark Revival both got enhanced console ports, and all three games are getting physical releases. I think it's great that Joey Drew Studios is polishing up their old work. Bendy and the Ink Machine and Dark Revival even got some quality of life updates a while back. And of course Lone Wolf is a massive overhaul of Boris and the Dark Survival. Alongside that, Secrets of the Machine is doing a great job at building hype for future installments. I think the Bendy series is doing really good, and I can't wait for the future. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and joining our monthly membership. It helps support us, and you get a bunch of cool perks like shoutouts in our videos, custom emojis, badges next to your name, exclusive looks at upcoming projects, and more. Special thanks to our current member, Shaun, toit. And thanks to you for watching. Be sure to check out some of our other videos.